Hey guys, just a quick intro to today's interview with my guests, Ebony Reed and Louise Story, about their amazing new book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Just want to let you know how much I love it. I hope that you'll go get it and let them know that you saw it here. Support me and subscribe to the channel. And also, just want to let you know that my mic was not plugged into the video feed here. It's never happened. I fired my producer. He is long gone now, even though he doesn't exist. But I still hope that you enjoy the interview, even with my echoey audio. You can hear it crystal clear on the right feed. The mic is on the audio on the podcast. Enjoy the interview. Thanks. There they are, Louise, Ebony, welcome to Stand Up. Louise, welcome back. It's been way too long since we talked to Ebony for the first time. I'm so excited to talk to both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I figured, for listeners who aren't familiar with you, your work, or the subject that we're about to get into, which is obviously so serious and so important, I thought it might be interesting to have you talk about the other one. You co-authored this book, you lived in this book, you lived basically with all the people that you talked to, you got to know. It must have been so intimate, so personal and challenging. So I'll start with you, Louise. How did you meet Ebony, and what was it like to work on this really important issue and book with her?
Ebony and I met at the Wall Street Journal. We worked together there. We were working together in the summer of 2020. And that's what kicked off our conversations about these racial issues and the similarities in our lives, because there are many, but also the differences, and the differences are tied to race. And I'll just say, working with Ebony, I'm this kind of blunt New Yorker sometimes, and I just say what I think. And Ebony really makes people come out of all the conversations feeling great with her. And I learned from her also how to put just a little more sugar on the message sometimes. And often I would say to her, "Oh, do you want to just tell this person this?" And it would go really well. And I'm so grateful to have worked with you, Ebony.
Ebony, what on earth is she talking about?
Just a little Southern charm. I was born in Louisville and I live in Kansas City, Missouri, but I will tell you, it has been a complete honor and pleasure to have worked with Louise on this project. I can't imagine having done it with anyone else. Louise is resilient. She is tough. She doesn't give up. She chases things down to the last second. Her precision and accuracy. I mean, it has been an amazing experience.
I love it. I think we'll just keep doing this.
It's great. Yeah. Thank you, Ebony.
I worried. I was like, oh, this will be my clever question at the top. And then I go, what if they hate each other?
No, we've partnered for 3 years, and the partnership has gone phenomenally well. And we've learned so much in the partnership too. And we started friends and we're ending friends, and we're respectful partners. And it's a beautiful thing.
It is.
Ebony actually left. Where are you going? No, that's so nice and sincere. And I love that you're both, that's been the experience and that you've learned so much from each other. Just one more general question. Louise, how do you, and for you, Ebony, even though it's a racial question, I mean, I'm sure you learned a lot through all of this, but Louise, first for you, how do you approach as a white person this issue, how Americans made the black-white wealth gap? How did you come to that? You're a longtime reporter. I know you understand journalism, but this is a really hard issue.
Yes. Well, I did, first of all, approach it as a journalist. And as a journalist, what you do is you listen deeply to what other people have to say and try to really understand, ask good questions, see things from a variety of points of views, and make people comfortable sharing with you. I will add, though, as a person and as a white person, I pulled on lessons I've learned all my life back to childhood, when I went to a public elementary school that was about 40% Black students and the rest white. The town of Eatonville was in my school district, where Zora Neale Hurston's from. And I've recognized now later in life that my experiences as a child with many Black Americans and amazing Black American teachers were formative in, my comfort and my appreciation for all people.
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. I often just think about the fact that the first school bus I got onto was like half Black. And I didn't think about it then, but I think a lot about it now. And in terms of what you experience when you're really young or at any other age. Ebony, obviously, you've grown up Black in America. You're also a journalist, so you covered so many of these issues. But I'm guessing you learned a tremendous amount, even though you have that both professional and personal experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. learned some things even about my own family that we might talk about in
Right.
the research. But, I would say, I hadn't been out doing like on the ground reporting for a while because I'd been more in an editing role and an administrative role more
Mm.
recently. Louise had had more recent reporting experience. And I will tell you that some things have changed with technology from the last time I was out as a reporter. And one of the things that surprised me was the people we interviewed. You talk about it being intimate, 3 years. I mean, like, we really got to know them, but they got to know us, and
Yeah.
they Googled us and they followed us in social and they knew all about us. So when we called people, one of the things that surprised me was how much they already knew about me,
Mm.
coming in to interview them.
Yeah, you must have had to. We don't really need to get into it, but good journalists have to work really hard to establish credibility. Even if you look up your byline and see all the amazing things the two of you have done, these are such important, and they were personal issues, certainly,
Mhm.
obviously, to the people that you wrote about. Let's talk about that. Louise, how did you do this book? I mean, you picked specific people, you focused a lot on Atlanta, and we can talk about why that does and doesn't matter. But talk about what the reader is going to learn, how you did this book, and then just give it a minute or two, whatever you want, and then Ebony just pick up and add to how you guys researched and wrote this book over these years and who you looked at, Louise.
Thank you. Well, so first we examined the data and looked at the data, throughout history through some different research. And we both teach at the Yale School of Management. We teach MBA students about racial wealth gaps across all races. And so from that work, we determined what points in history we thought were really important to include in the book. And then, as journalists who capture stories of people, we knew we wanted to have people with interesting things going on in their lives between 2020 and 2023 who also had families who had interesting experiences that we could document 1850s to the present. So we did about 400 interviews in depth, many of them about 2 to 3 hours, many much longer ones with the people we landed on. And we found the people who had very interesting things going on between 2020 and 2023. So you're going to want to follow what happens, but where we also could document their grandparents and find that they had a grandparent who was in Freedman's Bank, or they had a grandparent, who had land taken away, and we learned things about their families they didn't know.
Ebony, you want to go and talk specifically about some of those people? Because I just basically, all the ones that were public that I didn't know about, I went and did a deep dive on. Like, I'm
Mhm.
following them on social and I'm really interested in their whole lives. I'm Wikipediaing Andrew Young, obviously knew who he was, but I was like, wait, he did this, he did that, he's doing this. Obviously, his
Right.
affiliation with the bank. Who do you want to talk about and add to how you did this book?
Sure. We can talk about as many of them as you'd like. I'll start with Brooke Bacon. He is a Black man that lives in New Hampshire. Earlier in his life, he lived in Georgia, where he has family in Eastern Georgia, Scrubbin County. His mother moved around a lot in different jobs when he was little so that she could find better economic opportunities. Sometimes they had to stay with friends and didn't have their own place. Ultimately, they ended up on the East Coast, lived in Boston. Fast forward to his college years. He was in college. He had enough money to get in the first semester. And then his mom was also in college too at the same time because she was working to improve herself so she could have a college degree. And he needed a cosigner, and the school hadn't told him that he would need a cosigner. That's what he told Louise and I. And so, he ended up having to leave school because he didn't have a cosigner. So he left with that debt. And that's actually one of the things that I found most crushing for many Black Americans. One, Black Americans tend to carry more student loan debt. And then there are people who carry the debt who didn't finish a degree. So now they have the debt, but they don't have the chance to get the higher earning wages. In the summer of 2020, Brooke was living his life. He had married a white woman and he was living in New Hampshire. And he got a call that his father had been killed by the police. So now, for the first time, he was grappling with his Black roots, and he talks with us and shares that journey that he went on. And so Louise and I met Brooke in the fall of 2021. He was on a 63-mile justice walk to bring attention to his father's case. And we walked half of that 30 miles over 3 days with him to learn and to really understand what he was going through and to meet his family.
Well, nobody can question your dedication to the people that you interview. Oh my gosh, that is intense. Louise, we can do this all day, talk about the people, and I want to get into more of them, but I realize I should have asked, even before, although I'm so interested specifically in each person, the issue at hand. And there's so much there, but I think we do have to define some words. And I don't want to bore anybody, but what does wealth mean? You ask that in a scholarly way in the classroom. You can ask that in a more casual way on a podcast like this. I can answer it in my Buddhist spiritual way. But I think the most important part is how you unpack what it means to inherit wealth and what a difference that means, and specifically in America. But how do you both want to talk about the wealth gap and define it in a scholarly and journalistic way, which is what you do throughout?
Well, first of all, thank you. People need to know what wealth is, and people are often confused about what it is. They often mix up wealth with income. And you don't know how many people we've said, and we're writing this book about the black-white wealth gap, and they say, oh, well, the person sitting next to me at work of a different race, they make the same income. So what's the issue?
Right.
But wealth is different from income. Income is a flow you get, and you can save some of that income and start to build wealth. But wealth is what you have. It's your net worth. It's all the stuff that you own minus what you owe. And so if you see someone and they've got a house, it doesn't mean they're wealthy necessarily. They might have a lot of debt on that house. And so it's just not very well understood. But once you know what wealth is, then you have to know what the gap is and what the data is. And the reason we called our book 15 cents on the dollar is because the typical Black household has 15 cents in wealth compared to $1 in wealth held by the typical white family. It's 15 cents on the dollar. And in fact, that's where it stood in the 1950s. It's moved around since then. It's gone up and down. And so we are on a mission to make 15 cents on the dollar a nationally recognized statistic, because that can change conversations.
Ebony, so often people believe, I've been hearing this for as long as I've been doing this work, talking to and listening to people, calling in my own old radio show. In America, everybody has the same opportunity. It's the land of the free. We all have the same opportunity. And I guess even if you did believe that, like in Louise's example, you're working next to a Black person, they might get paid equal or even more than you. That does not determine what we're talking about in terms of wealth, but it also is complete myth. Because the truth is, it's about opportunity. And you guys document so much about where there are missed, lacked, or purposely prevented opportunities for Black folks in America throughout history. I thought one thing that was really interesting to kind of make this argument and debunk that myth was serving in the military and what the GI Bill meant. Because if two guys, a Black guy and a white guy, went to war for America in World War II, and they didn't get similar benefits on the way out, that seems like a pretty good measure. Talk to me about what you learned there.
Absolutely. So the GI Bill, as you mentioned, was established in our country to benefit all veterans who fought in World War II, regardless of race. And at the time the GI Bill was created, it helped veterans buy homes, start businesses, go to college. While it was a federal program, it was administered at the local level. So that meant that however people felt locally, that would influence who could use the GI Bill. So the majority of Black Americans who were veterans in World War II were not able to use the GI Bill. And so one example, when we look at housing, purchasing homes, there are some estimates that say less than 3% of Black GIs were able to use the GI Bill to buy a home. And this is really important because white veterans who were able to use it were able to set their family up to move into middle class, to develop generational wealth, to reap the benefits of home ownership. And, for Black families who missed out on that, we're talking multiple generations, years and years of not owning a home. We talked with people that, maybe their family was able to buy a home, but 30 years later, 20 years later, that's a long time to wait. I will share something with you that I found out in the reporting that was surprising for myself relating to the GI Bill, but it is not the common experience, and it is not what most Black Americans experienced who were veterans and who were not, because they were not able to use the GI Bill. And we document that in the book with family after family. But I will tell you that on one day, after I had had a long day of talking to so many families that were not able to use it, Black families, and I was frustrated, I said to one of my aunts, I hope someday I will meet a Black American who was a descendant of someone who actually used the GI Bill, part of that 3%, and be able to understand what their experience was and how that impacts their economic trajectory. And that's when she let me know. She reminded me, my grandfather fought in World War II. He had used the GI Bill to purchase a home for my family that he lived in with my grandmother. And I am that person that I was looking for. And so, that helped me understand a little bit about my own economic trajectory. But I'll tell you, people who read this book will take them on a journey as they think about their own families and their own economic journeys.
Yes, I'm on the journey right now as I'm reading it. I mean, you're absolutely right. You think about your entire family and you don't, by the way, most of us don't even know. I mean, I don't know what my grandparents' financial windfalls or misgivings or mistakes were necessarily.
But you know what, Pete? I don't know if you got to this part yet. You could look up, if you know their names, your family members in 1860 and 1870. The government census back then, the federal census, asked people their wealth. So it's pretty interesting to see where you fall in that.
Yeah, I want to do that. I think my dad's side wasn't here yet, but my mom's side certainly was. My grandfather was a lumberjack. Anyway, moving on. It's really interesting and really important to think about, and you do, as a reader, want to think about that. Louise, you've covered the banks, all the time. I don't know how much you covered or wrote about Black-owned banks, but you feature Greenwood Bank specifically, and you talk about banking, and you guys talk a lot about lending and lack of opportunity and obvious discriminatory policies from banks. And it's really easy to know what happened as we lived through it in the financial crisis after 2008 and the housing bubble burst and so on, which you also touch on. But talk to me about what role banks play in the book, in the gap. I mean, we could fill up the next 45 minutes on, but whatever you want to say about lending and specifically Greenwood or anything else.
I'll highlight just a couple things. One is that you may have heard just in popular conversation that a high percentage of Black Americans are not banked, that they're underbanked. And you may have heard that there's some distrust of the banking system. So we cover Freedmen's Bank, which is back in the 1800s, which was backed, the US government set it up for formerly enslaved people and then lost their money. So that's just an interesting way for people to understand why through the generations so many Black families put their money in a money belt or under their pillow or in their couch. We also cover Black banking, and we cover efforts, for example, in the 1960s with Freedom National Bank, which Jackie Robinson set up.
Yeah.
And that was set up to have community banks that would actually lend to their own community. Because before that in Harlem, there had been white banks there who were taking depositors' money from Black people and lending it out to white people downtown. So we cover that as an interesting story. And then we do cover the 2008 financial crisis with a lens on race and how it affected race. And, I covered that in Contemporary Times. I covered the Wall Street part of that. And looking now at how it affected Hispanic and Black Americans is very interesting. And then, finally, we follow Greenwood Bank, as they were originally called, which is a fintech banking platform. And it was set up by Killer Mike, the rapper, and Andrew Young, the civil rights leader, with great intentions to try to help banking for Black Americans. In the course of our book, you see what happens, and you see that they hit a lot of hurdles and they had a lot of difficulty finding a way to work with Black banks. And some of their customers were disappointed that years in, they weren't making mortgage loans available. And so it's not an easy path for Black banking. And this is one of the reasons that Black Americans have trouble moving forward their family's wealth.
Ebony, what would you add to any of what Louise just said?
Some other challenges that Black families have is home ownership. We touched upon that a little bit, stock ownership, and of course, inheritance is one of the major drivers of wealth.
inheritance is one of the major drivers of wealth. And what is that? How does that affect the black-white wealth gap?
Well, inheritance doesn't just happen when people pass away and leave their assets behind. It also happens throughout their lives. So if someone has wealthy parents and they're able to help them with their first home purchase or help them go to college.
Right.
Let's
And
just spell it out. More white people have wealth that they give to their children. There's more money in white Americans' hands. And so that's why it affects the black-white wealth gap, that white parents are able to help their children with that money through their lives and upon death.
I feel like it's so important to talk about the causes. And at the beginning of the book, you have a section, you ask the question, who's to blame, government or business? You write, in recent years, a combination of public and private setbacks has continued. Predatory lending, the events of 2008 financial crisis were yet another set of harms brought by the government and private industry. Then there's the case of student loan debt, one of the most pressing current private-public problems, which has strong racial implications. Discrimination in hiring and promotions at private companies and unequal pay levels among racial groups are mostly business actions, but government agencies also haven't been great in their human resource practices. And then there's the differing access and behaviors around investing in the stock market and building companies that go public, which have business and education wound up with them. Like the backs of enslaved people who were whipped and scarred uncountable times, the difference in wealth between white and black Americans is tied to many economic lashes, old and new. Wow, that's a powerful paragraph, Ebony. That is really a nuanced look in just one paragraph as to who's to blame. It's so easy for us to blame either private sector, banks, etc., racism in general, or the government, but it's not that simple, I guess,
Right.
huh?
Right. It's very complex. It's like a spider web. When you start to look at the black-white wealth gap, it is so many factors, so many pieces to it. You know, like you said, it's education, it's lending, it's inheritance, it's also historical structures that have been set up in our country.
Let's now go to another one of the people that you featured, Louise, keeping it obviously really fascinating to take a look at who you looked at. Is it Tandrea Dixon?
It's Tandrea Dixon.
Tandrea, tell me about her.
Well, we met her at an online event for Greenwood Bank. So we were following along what happened with Greenwood Bank, and we wanted to meet the people who were signing up as customers so we could understand the problems and opportunities they had and why they wanted Greenwood to help them. So we interviewed tons of them, and there's many in the book. What struck us about Tandrea is that not only did she have, financial needs she wanted to pursue, but she was very thoughtful and focusing in her life on the black-white wealth gap. She was listening to a lot of financial podcasts, and a lot of people will say, well, I'd like to buy a house, but this was like her mission. And so we felt like through following what happened with her in the 3 years that we followed from 2020 through 2023, that we would see if she could make progress. We felt if anyone could, it would be her. She had a $100,000 job, but she didn't come from wealth. She was the first in her family to be out in a field picking a plant. And, I don't want to give away the ending, but she wasn't able to reach many of the goals by the end of the book that she had set out. And you really see the setbacks despite her great earnest effort through the course of the book.
What did you learn, Ebony, if you can? Maybe this is a hard question to be put on the spot, but about resilience that you didn't already know. As I was reading it, I was just thinking about how I get when I feel bad for myself and how self-pity is really insidious, of course. But I don't get that. I didn't get that feeling from the people that you write about as much in that a lot of times they pick themselves back up. But Tandrea was one of those people who just setback after setback. And I'm thinking, man, I am so fragile. I get one setback and it's fetal, and I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do? Woe is me. What did you learn in documenting, writing about these folks and how they deal with it?
I think readers will find that every single person in our book never gave up. And I think that that's something that's very inspiring. Even at times I would think about it in my own personal life. Like, we're interviewing people who are up against some tough situations, and they have not given up.
That's great to hear that that's the collective, the way that you look at it, at all these folks, and a great inspiring thing to know about if you're going to read the book. What about Black-owned businesses? Like, that seems such an obvious idea to support the people whose lives and communities you want to improve in. And if you live in a Black neighborhood, keep your money there. And true of any neighborhood, it's an interesting economic idea. It always feels to me like no matter who is coming up with it, support your own, support local. Even it's like, okay, I will. And then you go over and buy cheaper tires in the neighborhood next door, or you order them online, etc. But I wonder how the theory has evolved in Black communities. And I wonder, as I read the book, if it's actually effective, if it actually works. Talk to me, I guess we'll start with you, Ebony, about the idea of supporting Black-owned businesses, investing in Black-owned businesses, and how it works, and how sometimes maybe it doesn't, counterintuitively.
Yeah. So we cover some historic communities in our book, one being Tulsa, which was a very strong Black business community, in our country before it was burned down, in the Tulsa massacre. At that time, the money was, in that community. So one of the things that happened with, segregated communities, and also prior to us having some of the technology we have today, like you mentioned, people are buying their goods on Amazon. It is, we cover this in the book. It is a lot more challenging today to have money circulating in just one pocket, just in one community, just in one place.
Also thought it was really interesting just the way that you help the reader, if they don't already know how much more expensive it is to be poor, Louise. It's so much harder to get a home loan, a car loan. You're paying more, and you try to make it seem, look fair. Well, someone's loaning you money, they're taking a risk. They want to get their money back, so they're taking a bigger risk. But that can be perpetuated generationally, obviously. But talk a little bit about how much harder it is to be Black and even middle class, much less, poor, and trying to move up and borrow money.
Yes, I would love to talk about risk-based pricing in our economy. Companies charge more money if they categorize a person as being, quote, risky. And some of that riskiness that they put on an individual's file may come from something that individual has done, but sometimes it comes from really kind of atmospheric factors that have nothing to do with the person's behavior. A really good example is automobile insurance. So that is not priced based on race, but it is priced based in part on zip code where people live. And zip codes with higher crime rates, people who live there have to pay more in auto insurance. So just think about that for a minute, Pete. Someone's worked really hard. They finally saved enough money to purchase a car, and they go to get their auto insurance. And because of where they live, which is maybe where they can afford to live, or they want to be with their family, or whatever reason, they have to pay more in auto insurance than a really wealthy person in a wealthy neighborhood does. So you can see why the auto insurer wants the money, but is it that person's fault that there's more crime in their zip code? And so one of the things our society could think about, it would really have to be a public and private discussion, because, we have a capitalist private market where companies charge for risk, but could think about is who should bear some of these risks? Should this individual person in the zip code pay more just because he lives there?
Great example, perfect example. Ebony, you guys thread the needle or identify the problem of the wealth disparities in general, and when measured on the racial gap, we could, if some few Black Americans are doing really, really well, you could maybe be looking at the statistics and say, oh, the racial gap is narrowing, things are getting better. But you talk delicately, and I'm muddling through the problem, which is when you try to fix these things, if there's only a few Black folks that are getting very, very wealthy, if wealth concentration is only at the top within the Black community, then that's still terrible for Black folks. Help me explain that in the scholarly journalistic way, and make me shut up, please.
Right. So when people say that they want to fix the Black-white wealth gap, or they want to improve things for Black Americans, one of the questions that we asked in the reporting of this book is for who? And that's really important, because when companies say, oh, we're trying to improve things, it's really important to look at who they're saying that they're trying to improve things for, and then to go back and see, is what they intended to do really happening? So, yes, you can improve, things economically for people at the top, for Black Americans at the top, and that could pull, the mean or the average up if you improve things for people at the top. But you're right, that doesn't necessarily mean that things will be changed for people who are not at the top. And so that is something that we cover through the chronicling of the lives of people in this book.
Louise, how do you give the whole nation a fair shake if you're mostly looking at people that live in Atlanta, as fascinating as it is?
Well, the book does include people in other places like New Hampshire, for example, and Tandrea, who you brought up before, grew up in North Carolina and lives there through most of the book. And we interviewed people around the whole country and found that these stories are very common. And, we have a chapter on Oklahoma, for example. The book moves around in space, but, we also were thinking not only of the historical, analytical, and factual points, but also about the readability of this book, because we want this book to be read by so many different people who can't put it down. And part of a great readable book is a book that has a nexus on a place. And so Atlanta made sense for that. It helps the book be coherent, but the stories are true. These are national stories, and they reflect really people across the whole country.
Yeah, and it really makes, I've spent a good amount of time in Atlanta, and it's a fascinating place, but it's a very segregated place too, in a lot of ways, both racially and when it comes to socioeconomics. It would
And
seem.
it's a little bit like, if Atlanta, called the Black Mecca, can't get it right, where can you? If Atlanta, just in our book we cover, they had a wealthy community there, largely white community, Buckhead, trying to break off of the city.
Yeah.
But this is what's going on in Atlanta. The nation should be talking about it.
Yes, and it is so readable. The book is so readable. I have not been able to put it down. I've really enjoyed it and started promoting it a lot earlier than a lot of other things I do, just because I've been reading it so much and loving it and skipping around as I always do. And at the end, you talk about solutions, and I just wanted to just mention them, what you say, and just maybe go into one or two. But you say, first, support more transparency into the wealth distribution in our country. Second, ask who benefits from new government or company policies. Third, pay attention to conversations around risk and pricing. Fourth, when someone says they want to close a wealth gap, ask for which people, which I think is always a fun thing to do at dinner. Fifth, and finally, be open to change. I saw a little of the efforts I've made in my life with all of those things, and that made me feel good. And then I learned, well, I could do more, I could do better. But a lot of this stuff is, as the first, before you even say those, they're personal choices and behaviors, and putting your energy, your vote, your activity, and obviously your money where your mouth is. Ebony, say a little bit more about, how the listener, much less the reader, changes the way they live, think, or spend their time, money, and resources, and just think about the wealth gap in general.
Sure. Another recommendation that we have for people, as a personal recommendation, is that they work in partnership with another person who is different from them on a significant project or initiative at some point in their life. And we think if more people, Louise and I agree on this, if they did this, then they would really understand other people's perspectives, experiences, and it would change conversations in our country. So to the visual eye, Louise and I are of different races, but also, I live in Kansas City, Missouri. She's based on the East Coast. She's married and has 3 children. I'm unmarried and was widowed in the pandemic. And so we've had to work through family structures, different aspects of our life to create this book. And that meant that we had to think about, what, equality meant. What did it mean to come together on this book? And so we had to think through, how we would spend our money and our time. And, we think that doing this for more people would be certainly helpful and bridge conversations in our country.
Louise, I've tried my whole life to open doors and create opportunities for, especially specifically, probably for, more importantly, for people of color, LGBT people as well, I think, but I think I haven't thought about that as much. You can't see it obviously as much, But like, let's say I'm this well-meaning white person of privilege, which I am, and I've opened those doors for people, and as we should. That's the part of having privilege. It's a part of being born here. It's like, just, make sure you extend it to somebody else who didn't have it. But that seems virtuous and it seems uncomfortable. And maybe I don't know a young Black person that's interested in this job or this opportunity. And if I go out and look around for somebody, it can be uncomfortable and weird to try to create opportunities sometimes. Have you encountered that? What advice do you have for other white folks in terms of just doing more to advocate for people who aren't like them, who aren't in their network, didn't go to their school, etc.?
Well, people have to spend time with a big mix of people. If people are spending time mainly with people who look like them and are of their same economic level, and then they may not meet different people. And we all choose how to spend our time, and people can make different choices. People think about whether they go to church and where. People think about schools they choose for their children if they're choosing a school. People think about associations they're in. People choose what companies they work at sometimes, and different companies prioritize inclusivity more than others. And so you have to make a choice to be regularly around all kinds of people. And then when you're around people, really get to know them personally, listen, form meaningful relationships. And Ebony and I formed a meaningful relationship even before we decided to do this book. And that's how the book could happen. It wasn't like we barely knew each other and then we did this book. And then in the course of doing the book, we continued to get to know each other and navigated a lot of things together. And we found the kind of give and take and understanding we needed to have for each other's situations to make a partnership, even if it wasn't an identical partnership, but to make it a fair and equitable one. And so it's very doable for white people, for any people, but it takes effort and a commitment to talk with other people who are different from you.
Ebony, I mean, the same question. I want to narrow the wealth gap. I want to give other people similar opportunities that I've had. What should I do? What works? This is not necessarily a law or a policy or even a person you can vote for. Obviously, we're always talking about that. But what about on the personal side?
Right. Some of the people that we interviewed have talked with us about mentorship and how that has impacted their lives as a way to be connected with different people. So, I would pose the question of who is mentoring you and who are you mentoring? And I think that also speaks to networks, just as, Louise mentioned.
Talking to you guys is awesome and very intimidating because you're Yale business author journalists who have won a lot of things and had a lot of respect. So I hope that it was good enough, because this book is so important. It's one of those books that is an interview where you're like, I can't talk about it. Just read the book. You should read this book. I can't talk. There's no way to do justice the people's lives who you got to know and the way you wrote about them. And I already feel like I failed, but I hope people will read the book. And I'm so grateful that you joined me, and good luck on the book tour. And thank you very much.
Pete, you did a great job.
Very insecure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Louise. Thank you. Need to be built. Please write a follow-up letter informing me how good it was.
Thank you.
Thank you guys both very much.
Thank you.
All right, I hit end. Awesome.